Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Jonathan Brandt, and I'm with Peak Trust Company. I'm very excited to welcome you to the fourth and final installment in our four-part series on private retirement trust. If you've been with us for the earlier sessions, thank you for joining us again, and if you're just tuning in for the first time, we're glad to have you here. We have just a few quick housekeeping notes before we begin. If you have questions, you can submit your questions at any time using the Q&A panel. We'll answer them live throughout the session, and if we don't get to your questions, we'll follow up with you afterwards. And the slides for today's presentation will be available for download in the event dashboard, and then we'll also send them to everyone who's registered after the session. At Peak Trust Company, we specialize in trust administration for high net worth clients and their advisors. We serve clients across the US and internationally, and we're proud to operate in the top tier jurisdictions of Alaska and Nevada. Our mission is to offer flexible trust services and empower planning professionals with the tools they need to execute complex estate and asset protection strategies. In today's session, we'll focus on the funding mechanics behind a private retirement trust, what type of assets are appropriate, what statutory and case law guidelines govern contribution structure, and how to ensure exemption protection holds up under scrutiny. To guide us through this material, I am pleased to once again introduce our speaker, Dustin Nichols, founding attorney of the law office of Dustin Nichols. Dustin is a recognized leader in exemption planning and one of the original architects of the California PRT methodology. And with that, let's get started. Over to you, Dustin.
Again, Jonathan, thank you so much for the fantastic introduction. I feel truly blessed to have the opportunity to present to the Peak Trust attendees over these last four part series that I've done on the PRT. Much gratitude for the opportunity, and for those that are listening and have made it this far, congratulations. Thank you for listening as well. Hopefully you've come away with some golden nuggets, if you will, from the presentation. And today we're going to finish it off, put a dot on the I, a cross on the T on our four-part series. So thank you all again for making it this far. To recap, we did the PRT overview in part one. In part two, we did PRT planning with retirement purpose, which was a deep dive into the case law surrounding the PRT. And we just finished PRT planning logistics. And part four, we're going to be talking about the PRT funding basics. What can we put into this thing? What are the considerations that we need to be looking at and thinking about to ensure that what we're funding into the PRT is appropriate for its purposes? So when we discuss PRT funding basics, we're going to have also a discussion with respect to the statute again, just to recap on what the statute says. The retirement appraisal, very important. That's basically the retirement story and all of the backup and analytics that support how much we can fund and with what. And that goes directly into the consideration of what assets are appropriate and what aren't appropriate in PRT funding, because not everything is appropriate to put into the PRT. And we're going to go over a sample exemption analysis for Tom with a $20 million net worth as an example. And we're going to be talking about the integrating of other planning with the PRT, advanced estate planning, for instance, and what that might look like for Tom at the end of the day if he engaged in both. So I think those should be very telling, give you some good conceptualization, if you will, of the considerations around the funding and what it may look like at the end of the day if you integrate some estate planning. So the statute, when we go through the statute, look, this is a potent statutory exemption. It's unrivaled. It allows California residents to convert their exposed personal assets to exempt private retirement assets, and therefore it shields the exempt assets from creditors if the private retirement plan is principally or primarily designed and used for retirement purposes. Remember the exceptions we talked about in part one to the protection are the IRS, family, spousal, and child support obligations. Again, those are public policy exceptions. And to add icing to the cake, the statute is to be construed in a light most favorable to the debtor. But at the end of the day, we can protect retirement assets at the expense of creditors by recharacterizing these otherwise exposed personal assets into exempt private retirement assets with the proper planning and implementation of the PRT. PRT basics, if you recall, the private retirement plan is to be established by an employer company. It can be qualified or not qualified under ERISA. We prefer to use the non-qualified structure because then we're not subject to those limitations, prohibitions, restrictions, jurisdiction of the Department of Labor, all of these things. We stay out of those. We stay out of that box, that constricted box, not to mention the compliance and reporting that's required under ERISA plans. We don't have those. And the PRT, it's a vehicle. It's holding retirement and administering retirement assets for the benefit of an employee. So while it's employer sponsored, we have an employee that is setting up a retirement plan within the company and funding it, primarily privately. The trust is sponsored by the employer company. That's the settlor. It's initially funded by the employer, with some seed money. And then ultimately it's funded privately by the PRT participant. And very importantly, if you recall from parts, I think I talked about it in all three parts, the importance of having an independent trustee or custodian PRT to preserve the quote exclusion status from bankruptcy. Not exempt, it's also exempt, but not just exempt, it's excluded. And that's huge because it's not subject to the jurisdiction of the bankruptcy trustee, the PRT is. And its purpose, it's obviously primarily purposed for retirement to provide retirement benefits to that employee. So what's funded into the PRT? Once we've identified what assets are appropriate, those assets are 100% exempt if the plan is designed and used for retirement purposes. You're going to hear that over and over again. That's the resounding message. It has to be primarily purposed for retirement to get the potency of the 100% exemption. We talked about the exception creditors, the IRS, child support, family support, spousal support, and three-letter agencies. Not a lot of people talk about those, but you have to be careful because exemptions, for them to be asserted, well, they have to be money judgments. Disgorgements, like from three-letter agencies, the FTC, the SEC, anywhere where the basic result is that you never had a legal right to the money to begin with, you cannot assert exemptions against those type of judgments. It's real important when we're doing PRTs to, quote, clear the funding landscape, right? This requires a deep dive and into our due diligence process. And we talked about planning logistics in great detail, what that looks like. But ultimately, obviously, in a perfect world, the client has no claims. That makes it real easy. And then when all we're doing is just housekeeping. We're gathering all the asset and value information and the liability information. We're running a financial report to flush out all known creditors and the existence of any lawsuits or any judgments. All of those things are done in phase one of our due diligence planning. Obviously better to have no claims, but if there are, we'll vet them. We'll do the Zonix and Covey, what are called Zonix and Covey analyses, which are bankruptcy court cases. We talked about that in part 3 as well, that help us to establish a contingent liability set aside. Again, respecting the fact that there is a creditor out there. We can't just ignore them if they exist. We have to respect them, and this helps us do that. And we're also looking to make sure there's no transfer restrictions on identified retirement assets. We may, for instance, the client may want to contribute a portion of their limited liability company. Let's back up and talk about that for a second, just because in California, there is a weakness in the LLC statute in that if it's a single member LLC interest that a creditor is seeking to foreclose upon, they can take that asset, that they can foreclose on that interest and take the asset inside the LLC. It's called a foreclosure. Now, what's not subject to foreclosure outright like that is a multi-member LLC that has charging order protection. So what we'll do is we'll look to potentially use a membership interest in an otherwise single member, contribute some percentage to the PRT and create a multi-member LLC construction. Now we have an exempt channel that represents the distributions to the PRT that it holds in terms of its percentage of non-voting membership interest in that LLC, right? But the operating agreement might have restrictions on the transfers. It might require consent, things like that. In my example, obviously that's not so much because you have a husband wife and they're obviously very friendly, but let's just talk about what if there's a membership interest in an LLC that has other members that aren't related, they're not family, and there are provisions restricting transfers without consent and things. And it'll even say in the language on those LLC operating agreements that if you do effectuate a transfer, that transfer is void ab initio from the beginning, right? So always want to make sure as we're clearing the funding landscape, we're looking at the assets that may be appropriate to fund the PRT with because they're going to contribute in some way to paying the retirement benefit at retirement, right? That ultimately is the threshold test to what's appropriate or not. But then we have to make sure we can even move it. And if we can, then what's the protocol to ensure that we're doing it properly? So we don't ignore what's going on around, even with the client, even with respect to their assets and the protocols and criteria that those assets may be subject to when we're thinking about transferring them. The exemption analysis is absolutely key. We have a calculator that takes all of the assets of the client and populates them specifically within their asset categories, applies the logarithms that contain the exemption amounts for those asset categories, and gives us a 2-page report that shows I call it the creditor exposure report. That's the pre-PRT exposure, right? How much is exempt, how much is not exempt, and what limited protections may be in existence. Again, those charging order protections, let's say, for instance, that for multi-member LLCs and for limited partnerships. And then page 2 is going to show us what we might be able to improve by way of the client's exemption protection potential. Again, this is a 30,000-foot shot. We're not digging into detail at this point, but what we're seeing is, hey, is this client a good candidate, and how much can we potentially improve their exemption protection by using the PRT and recharacterizing otherwise can't lose very important retirement assets that are exposed on the personal balance sheet and putting them over onto the retirement exempt balance sheet. That gives us some idea. In green, a lot of that red will turn to green in the pie chart, or blue being protection of future values within the PRT. Now, in order to really determine the particular funding needs of the employee participant, the retirement planner will conduct an extensive analysis of the participant's particular circumstances, which will set the stage for the participant's retirement story. Page 1 of our plan reports are the retirement story for that client at that time. And it shows very specifically what assets are in here and why. For a judge, it makes it very easy to read, so they're not having to go through a 90-page document with standard deviations and Monte Carlo simulations and schedules and formulas, things like that. It makes it a lot easier right at the front end to say, hey, here's what's in here and why. But it does integrate exemption diagnostics with traditional retirement modeling. There is the regular component of the actuarial analysis, and the planner designs the retirement plan. He creates basically the story that we're talking about that sets forth the need for the assets that are being put into the plan. It is extensive. It is a deep dive. It goes into lifestyle expenses and analysis that's beyond just traditional actuarial, because what we're really doing is going over the top to justify why we're putting whatever we're putting in here. And I believe that carries a lot of weight when we're talking about why things need to be in this and why it should be exempt at the end of the day. The factors that are considered in the retirement appraisal, it's not exhaustive, but these are what I would call the major bullets, are the projected retirement age. There is no set retirement age. This is not ERISA. I've done plans for people as old as 75 years old that are still working. I have a lot of clients that probably will never stop working, that they're maintaining their wealth is their full-time job, and we can work with that. Life expectancy is also considered. How much do we need to put in there to make sure there's enough for the rest of this person's life to sustain and maintain their lifestyle? And what is their lifestyle? How do they spend money? What do they have that needs to be maintained over time? All of that are factors. The net worth. Obviously, the more the net worth, the more you need to be able to set aside to maintain it. The projected lifetime net worth, what's that? What it may look like projected over time. That's important. Earnings capacity. What is it? How much are they making? Income is a very important component because what we're really doing is ensuring that income continues after the person maybe dials back on how much they work. Types of assets held, itemized lifestyle expenses per year throughout the participant's lifetime, adjustments for inflation. We all have seen what inflation has done. The cost of eggs, for example, and not to belabor the point that's brought up by our president during his campaign, but it's true. When I go to the store, eggs are expensive. What assets are needed to produce that lifetime cash flow during the participants' retirement years? And we'll run it out to age 95 because a lot of people are living longer. And let's be honest, we want to make sure that there's enough money to last for the rest of this person's life to maintain their lifestyle. Now, the appraisal report, like I said, is the engine. With this information that we've gathered from all of those bullets, factors, the retirement planner is able to generate a retirement planning report that integrates the exemption diagnostics, as well as provide Monte Carlo projections, which is a mathematical technique that generates random variables for modeling the projected variability of the retirement assets, their values throughout the lifetime of the PRT participant. The resulting calculations are the prove-up, the participant's retirement need, the roadmap for the appropriate annual funding that will be required to fulfill this need. The analytics and the resulting retirement planning model are basically, it is the roadmap. It is ultimately what needs to be followed. Maybe there's benchmarks that need to be realized in certain investments. These things are all modeled out to show why the stuff is in here. And again, ensure that the need that's been identified is filled. Now, in funding the PRT, basically there's two ways that we generally fund the PRT. One is with some lump sum funding, some money in immediately, but that's not the end all be all to really fulfill the retirement criteria that this thing needs to have. There needs to be some gradual accumulation of money in over time. That's retirement, right? But it's okay to do some direct recharacterization to catch up, certainly, with where the PRT needs to be able to maintain and sustain that lifestyle need. But also money in over time, which actually has some ancillary benefits and protections that we're going to talk about. But let's talk about Barnes, because in Barnes, the debtor sold their home and purchased an annuity with the proceeds and then claimed the annuity was exempt because they intended to use it to fund their retirement. I wish it was that easy. And considering the use of the word plan in CCP 704.115A1, the court stated that a plan requires more than an instant transmutation of a lump sum of previously non-exempt money or other assets into an exempt retirement plan. It contemplates the gradual accumulation of money to fund a future retirement. Now, this is supported by the language of the statute, which provides that a private retirement plan means private retirement plans, including but not limited to union retirement plans. Union retirement plans provide for a retirement income funded by employee and employer over a long period of time. So recap, debtor sold their house, they purchased an annuity, called it their retirement, but the court said, sorry, it doesn't meet the definition of a plan. A plan requires more than that instantaneous transmutation of a lump sum. It requires gradual accumulation of money over time. So we obviously take that at face value. And as part of our PRT funding matrix, we ensure that there is a PRT contribution promise that helps to ensure money is going in over time, but also has some ancillary protections that you can't ignore. For instance, when we talked about this, and I believe it was part too. But in any event, you can fund with a contribution promise, and that contribution promise can be secured by, get this, the excess equity in a principal residence over the homestead exemption and any loans. So that exposed net equity can be utilized as security. And the net effect is the PRT becomes a first secured priority creditor over that net equity. It's purposed for retirement. Why? Because it's security to ensure that the promise that you've made to pay your PRT is actually realized. It's not a dummy lien. It has substance. However, overfunding is not a good thing. Putting too much in your PRT, and under the wrong circumstances to boot, makes it even less effective, if you will, if challenged. Now, Rooker is an example, a perfect example of what not to do. In the matter of Rooker, Rooker had 3 wholly owned corporations that he used to establish a pension plan and several 401ks. And Rooker was the beneficiary, the only beneficiary of these plans. The contributions to the plans by the corporations were substantial in relation to the salaries the corporation paid to Rooker. In some instances, exceeded his salary. In case the corporation contributed at least $30,000 more to Rooker's plan than paid him in salary in 2001 and 2002, and the plan contributions were equal or equal to his salary. So Rooker willfully caused the plans to be, quote, overfunded by contributing in excess of the annual limits imposed by the IRS. The overfunding amount was about 20% of the total value of the plans. It is important to note that the IRS funding rules don't apply to the PRT because it's non-qualified. However, you still have to follow the rules, and you can't fund more than can be substantiated, supported in the retirement plan analysis. So this is an example of what not to do. Overfunding, the excesses, those are not protected under the statute. And in this case, it actually diluted retirement purpose for Mr. Rooker, because it was obvious that he really wasn't putting retirement planning into play. It was truly an asset protection, hide the ball, hide the money. And the courts aren't stupid. They see these things. And so we want to make sure that when we're doing this, when we're putting this together, that we're being very mindful of not overfunding, that we're staying within the lines that we've drawn. We can support everything we put in here, because at the end of the day, that's going to make the difference. So assets appropriate for the PRT funding, certain select personal assets, certain select business assets, and a PRT digital wallet and special protections for transactions involving digital assets. There is a digital asset revolution going on around us right now. I don't think anybody can deny that at this point. We have the Genius Act, we have now a Bitcoin stockpile, and different things being created that recognizes and legitimizes this new internet of value, this digital money. And so we're trying to keep up with that and do have accommodations for digital assets and or the use of digital assets in retirement planning. Now you can go in your 401k and buy iShares from BlackRock, Bitcoin Trust, and Ethers as well. There's new funds being approved, I think, all the time now that involve other different coins. The idea, though, is that these are assets. It's another asset class that can be utilized, and I believe is important to consider and at least not ignore in this new age that we're in today. But other types of personal assets that are appropriate that can be funded and protected, exempt retirement assets in the PRT, phantom stock plan benefits, supplemental executive retirement plan benefits. These are called SERPs, and they're already retirement, but they're not exempt retirement. So certainly it makes it more appropriate to put them in some place where they can be protected for their retirement purpose. Cash, that's a no-brainer. Stocks and bonds, that's another no-brainer. Those are low-hanging fruit for creditors. Life insurance and annuities, I'm a big fan of a well-constructed life insurance policy inside the PRT that is used for retirement supplement purposes. It's not a death benefit play. It's for high cash accumulation with tax-free growth and then tax-free distributions. I think it's a great asset class. It makes a lot of sense for a plan PRT plan participant that's trying to do manage some tax or mitigate some tax exposure, I should say, as well as protect the cash value component of this life insurance policy, which under California law, if it wasn't in the PRT or in an ILIT, an irrevocable life insurance trust, the exemption for the cash value is only 15,000 and change, doubled for spouses. Not a lot. Real estate, that's another no-brainer. That's exposed. We can actually fractionally exempt the real estate as we move it. If it's going to go into the PRT and then maybe into an LLC, right? These are income-producing real estate investments, not like vacant land or something that's not income producing. And notes, promissory notes is another great. We have clients that have done advanced estate planning techniques like beat its, and that results in sales of their assets to these trusts in exchange for these beat it trusts in exchange for promissory notes. So they're holding these notes that represent the sale of their assets to their estate planning vehicles that are exposed and cash flowing. They really could serve your retirement purpose well by putting them in the PRT because they cash flow. And now you've protected the stream coming out of the beat its to yourselves, because this money is usually being utilized by my clients to live because they've sold their assets to their estate planning trusts. Types of business assets that are also appropriate for the PRT: business profits, corporate stock. There we might run into some hurdles if there's other shareholders. Again, maybe they're not family members and there's a buy-sell agreement. So we have to clear that path that we talked about a little bit earlier to ensure we can use those assets clearly, that they can be, the PRT can hold them. But those are great. The clients, they own their businesses and they want to put a proportionate share, some percentage into their PRT. So for when they sell, that liquidation event, the cash going into the PRT, that's a strong play, because now that money can be deployed in the exempt balance sheet to go further invest and grow that exempt balance sheet. Notes receivable, same thing. We talked about earlier, the promissory notes, commercial property. That's another no-brainer. Wrapping that in the LLC, also through the PRT, recharacterizing it as an exempt retirement asset can obviously put the client in a much better position to assure their retirement goals are realized, that they'll have enough money coming off of these. And that's not one event that may occur that's unforeseen that could take it all away. Because I always ask my clients when they're talking about, should I do this? Shouldn't I do this? And I ask them one question: how much can you afford to lose? And then it usually changes the conversation, because not too many of them feel like they can lose any of it. But sometimes it takes asking that question to put it in perspective. Because I think what was I talking to? One of the bankruptcy attorneys here in town in Orange County. And we were talking about how much does it take to recover if you lose it. 100% to get back 50%. And the bankruptcy attorney said, well, it's actually more than 100% if you factor in all the other costs and taxes and things that go along with it. And the answer is, yeah, that's correct. So getting ahead of this and utilizing these vehicles in the proper way can really make a big difference for a client's outlook for the rest of their lives. Now, we talked about digital assets and how we have special accommodations for these inside the private retirement trust. What we put together is we have a special co-trustee that's required during any time the trust property consists of digital assets be involved. The purpose is to prevent the PRT trustee from acting alone with respect to transactions involving these digital assets, ensures traceability of the digital assets, provides additional layer of accountability. The special trustee is appointed by the plan participant or the pilortes, or trust protector. If you recall, I just gave it a fancy Greek name to make it unique. And if the transaction is time sensitive and a special co-trustee is unavailable, the PRT pilortes may appoint a temporary special co-trustee. So that helps to prevent any lag, especially when these digital assets are still volatile and require more instantaneous action to realize a benefit. Now, let's talk about what assets are not appropriate. Not everything you can put into your PRT. I've had clients come to me and say, hey, can I put my house in my PRT? And my answer is no. And they said, why not? I said, it's not a retirement asset. I'm going to retire in it. It's not the same thing. As much as we'd like it to be. If the house isn't contributing in any way to paying a retirement benefit to the plan participant, it doesn't belong in there. And if it's your primary residence, it's not doing that. You're paying to live in it. It's not paying you. But again, we can still look to secure the excess equity in the house over the homestead exemption and any loans with the PRT contribution promise and give it protection to ensure that that net equity is there for your retirement. Vacation homes, same thing. We can use that as security as well, depending on how much the client has available in net excess cash flow. Because when you make these contribution promises, like under the Barnes case, you make that contribution promise, you're paying at least an annual interest component. And we base that on long-term AFR on the time that we create these for the client. There has to be available enough cash flow inside the client's exposed estate to be able to sustain the debt obligation associated with the contribution promise. And we have to obviously integrate and justify the contribution promise as part of the overall PRT funding matrix, just so you know. Boats are not appropriate retirement assets. They're liabilities. I had a boat for years, and we used to joke with my peers that boat stood for bust out another 1,000. And I think a lot of people can relate to that. But you got to love your boat. You just can't put it in your PRT. Same thing with jewelry. Those are personal use. It's not going to be sold and necessarily then put into paid out in a retirement benefits. It's not appropriate. Vacant land, same thing. Timeshares. Those are all not appropriate. What also isn't appropriate is your Ferrari, any classic cars, a yacht, right? All of those things, again, they're not contributing in any way to your retirement plan. So it's not appropriate to put those things in there. Now I'm going to show you how the exemption statute can benefit a person with a net worth of 20 million. We have Tom. He resides in Orange County. He's 57 years old. He has a projected retirement age, just for purposes of discussion, of 65. He's married. He has no kids. He has 900,000 of annual income, major fact. $7.1 million of commercial real estate, $3.3 million of principal residence net equity, again, over the homestead exemption in any loans, $2.5 million worth of stock in a basically S Corp. He's the only shareholder. He has a stock portfolio of about 2.3 million, another 2.3 million in cash. He's got $1 million already funded into his 401k. He's got a $700,000 cash value life insurance policy. He has $500,000 approximately of personal property, and he's got a $300,000 rollover IRA. All right, so let's see what Tom's picture looks like when we run his creditor exposure report. Remember, that's page 1 of our exemption assessment report. I call it the creditor exposure report. So Tom is 80% non-exempt. In other words, 80% exposed. That red is what we call our low-hanging fruit for creditors. So Tom's not exactly in the best exemption protection position. He's got 13% of his total net worth with assets with some limited protections, and then 1.3 million or 7% of actual exemption. So out of his 20 million, only 7% of his total net worth is exempt. So page 2, if you recall, is our exemption protection potential report. So his picture looks a lot better when integrating the PRT. So if all we did was a PRT for him, according to this 30,000 foot shot, and again, the calculator doesn't take into consideration all those little things that we need to look at, but it does give us a basic 30,000 foot shot of what it could look like for a client when we use the PRT, because we've integrated the exemption integration. We look at traditional retirement modeling within the calculator, 3% inflation. It takes his income, it takes his net worth, and gives us what looks to be a picture of what might be, right? In this case, a substantial exemption protection improvement up to 73% of his assets. Now, even more, we talked a little bit earlier about integrating advanced planning, estate planning, along with the PRT. And we have a lot of clients that have a little bit more sophistication need. So certainly when we have that situation, we work well with other estate planning firms to make sure we're doing it in the right order, that we're moving stuff out of the estate first, right? Before we're using the PRT to make sure there's enough left behind to sustain and maintain the lifestyle of the participant, of the client. So I want to show you a little bit about what that might look like if we integrate the PRT along with some advanced estate planning. Okay. In this particular instance, we're using Matt, and Matt's worth about $88 million, but only 3% of his 88 million using the calculator is exempt, which is not very much, only 2,657,000 worth. Now, after integrating the PRT with Matt's advanced estate planning, the picture looks very different of his 88 million. Now, backing up, remember Matt is 60 years old. He's married. He has 4 kids. He resides in San Diego, which is relevant, obviously, for the homestead exemption. And he has a projected retirement age of 65. We just use that again. Matt, wanting to do some advanced estate planning, decides, because he has 4 kids, that he wants to gift and sell some chunks of his estate to these IDITs, right? And these IDITs are now going to own and hold those particular assets. But what Matt gets back is, well, a stream of income in the form of these promissory notes, in which in this case, he took back 35 million worth of promissory notes. Now, the trust, they receive the business income and sale proceeds, and Matt pays the income tax, right? So now we have the powerful interplay of the grantor trust rules, right? Allowing for the client to maintain the obligation to pay the tax. We've moved a big chunk of money out of his estate. And what's the net benefit? He saved 53 million in estate tax over his life expectancy doing this transaction, and he exempted 54 million for his future retirement. Not a bad result. So hopefully you enjoyed all 4 parts of this series. You walked away with what I said in the beginning, some golden nuggets that help you to navigate the private retirement plan waters, exemption planning waters, if that's something that you want to do. I offer a 30-minute complimentary, what I call PRT primer, for potential clients on Zoom or in person if you're around here in Newport Beach, California. But in any event, certainly I'm here as a resource. I'm happy to help. There are potential prospects out there, and I do co-counsel with law firms to assist so that, well, I can be that back office for them to create these for the clients. And you get all the ancillary work, and I do actually share a part of the PRT fee. So if that's of interest, feel free to reach out to Sarah Bracken, my firm administrator, to set something up. And thank you again for attending. It's been my pleasure. Thank you, Peak, for having me. And I hope to do it again sometime. Thank you.